All right, Mr. Hendricks here. I'm going to demonstrate the quadrant streak plate technique for isolating bacteria, individual bacterial colonies, bacterial species from a mixed culture. And so first thing I did was to close all the doors and then wipe down the whole table with some sort of disinfectant, and to put on my gloves, mask, safety goggles, lab coat, tie my hair back. And so this will protect me, but it will also protect my cultures from being contaminated by me. When you're actually doing this in a lab, you don't want to be talking while you're doing it or breathing, because if you're talking, you're breathing, and then you might contaminate your culture. Of course, I'm going to be talking the whole time since I'm explaining. So let's get started. Here are our materials. Pretty simple materials. I've got a test tube rack with my culture. This was already labeled when it was originally grown, when it was inoculated. And so it's labeled with the date that it was inoculated. It's got my initials. It's got the name of the culture. This is E. coli. And the type of media, TSB. That means tryptic soy broth. And it could be nutrient broth or any other type of broth that works for E. coli. In this case, we're using TSB. Here's my inoculating loop. Okay, put that in that rack. Marker for labeling. I've got my petri dish here. That's got agar in it. We're pretending it has agar in it. It's been labeled on the bottom into 4 quadrants. Once you get this technique down and you get used to it, you'll use plates that don't even have those lines anymore, and you'll just know where the quadrants are. But when we're practicing, we do the lines to divide it and to show it. And I've got them labeled 1, 2, 3, 4. I've got this paper towel just so you can see the plate better. Got my Bunsen burner, got my striker to light it, and we're ready to go. First thing we want to do is label our plate on the bottom. And so I'm going to write the same stuff that's on my tube basically. I've got the name, I've got my initials, then I'm going to write E. coli, and then I'm going to write the type of media. In this case, we're going to pretend that this is nutrient agar. So I'm going to write N agar. All right, if you're in an actual clinical lab, you may have a computer that prints out a label for you to stick on here. It may have an ID number for each one. We don't have to do that, go into all that for this. Now I'm going to have my plate ready so that my number 1 quadrant is like in the upper left, just for convenience. And I'm going to go ahead and light my burner with my striker. Okay. If I need to adjust it, I can adjust it. It's actually already adjusted just right. Now, I don't know if you can see that flame. Let me see if I can hold something in front so you can see it a little better. Now, I can adjust it a little bit so that I get a blue cone in the middle, and that blue cone is hotter than it would be if I just had it like it was. Okay. Nice hot flame, very hot. Now I'm ready to get started. I'm going to flame my inoculating loop. I'm going to flame that for about 10 seconds so that the whole wire and loop gets red hot. I'm going to grab my culture, and I'm going to grab the lid with the pinky of my loop hand and take it off, and I'm going to flame this for 2 to 3 seconds. I'm going to go ahead and get my bacteria. That loop is cooling off as I'm slowly dipping it down. Get a loop full of bacteria out of that broth. Flame the top of the test tube, put the lid back on. Now notice the lid of the cap of the tube only touched my pinky the whole time, because I took it off with my pinky, held it with my pinky. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and lift this lid just barely. Get that loop in there, and I'm going to streak back and forth zigzag across. Only in quadrant 1. I'm going to close the lid tightly. I'm going to flame my loop again, making sure it gets red hot. About 10 seconds. Okay. Now I'm going to rotate my plate so that the 2 quadrant is roughly at the top, is for convenience. And now I'm going to lift it just barely. I'm going to start in quadrant 1, drag through the bacteria from quadrant 1 into quadrant 2. Then I'm going to zigzag about 10 times in quadrant 2. Close the lid, flame the loop. Rotating my plate. Give the loop just a second to cool, or you can touch it to a place in the plate where there's no bacteria to cool it. Alright, now I'm going to start in quadrant 2 and drag the bacteria from quadrant 2 into quadrant 3. Then I'm going to zigzag through quadrant 3 about 10 times. Close the lid, flame my loop. Get it red hot. There we go, that's hot. Okay, rotating my plate as my loop cools. And I'm going to lift it up a little bit, just lift that lid barely. Start in quadrant 3, drag the bacteria from quadrant 3 to quadrant 4, and streak back and forth until I've pretty much filled in all of quadrant 4 with my zigzags. Then I'm going to flame my loop one more time. Get all that bacteria off of there. Okay. Alright. Now, I'm going to set my loop in my test tube rack again. I'm going to cut off my Bunsen burner. Alright. Now, okay, I paused the video and I drew in the zigzags so you can see what it should look like. Okay, so here's what it should look like. Let's put a piece of paper behind it so you can see better. Alright, from quadrant 1, dragging into quadrant 2. Notice the lines in 2 are perpendicular to the lines from 1. Then we dragged from quadrant 2 to quadrant 3, zigzag. From quadrant 3 to quadrant 4, zigzag, and by quadrant 4 we should start getting individual colonies. Notice the lines in every quadrant rotate 90 degrees from the lines in the last quadrant, so they're all perpendicular to the previous quadrant. Of course, I always finish off by, after you put your supplies up, you want to disinfect your area. Take your gloves off, wash your hands. All right.